At Thanksgiving, my sister found out I had $12 million, and my family flipped, demanding I hand it over because she needed it more. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's story, I could really use your help. Lately, our channel's been losing a bit of steam, and one of the best things you can do is subscribe. It's fast, free, and helps us keep making awesome content. Your support means the world to us. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now, on to the story. I'm using a throwaway account for obvious reasons, and I've changed a few details to protect our privacy. So I'm Sarah, 38 years old, and I really need to get this off my chest. You ever see those families where one kid is treated like royalty and the other one's basically a ghost? Yeah, welcome to my world. Things were normal enough until I turned 8. I was an only child then, and while my parents weren't exactly the hugging, doting type, they were involved. Mom helped with schoolwork. Dad took me fishing on Lake St. Clair once in a while. We weren't picture perfect, but things were okay. Then came the night that changed it all. I remember Aunt Kelly waking me up around 2 a.m. and telling me to pack a bag. Mom was in the hospital. My sister Rachel was coming, but she was way too early. 2 months early, actually. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital trips and whispered conversations. Rachel was tiny, like one of my dolls, but hooked up to wires and machines. I wasn't allowed to touch her. I could barely get near her. That's when I first felt it. A shift, like an invisible barrier, went up between me and the rest of the family. When Rachel finally came home, the whole house transformed into something clinical. Mom became obsessed with keeping things sterile. Full-on hospital-grade disinfectants, sanitizer in every room, non-stop cleaning. To this day, the smell of bleach makes me anxious. But here's what really broke me. Anytime I showed even the slightest sign of being sick, I got shipped off. A sneeze? Off to Grandma Marie's. A little cough? Hello, Aunt Kelly's house. Every single time. At first, I didn't mind. Grandma baked cookies. And Aunt Kelly had a Killer Nancy Drew collection. But kids figure things out. Eventually, I realized I wasn't being sent away for fun. I was being treated like a hazard. Like I could ruin everything just by being there. I tried so hard to earn back their attention. Straight A's? Mom barely looked up from Rachel's chart. Won first place at the science fair with a project on renewable energy. Dad just asked me to store in the garage because Rachel was allergic to cardboard dust. Seriously, is that even real? The worst moment came when I was 12. I'd been practicing for months at a school talent show, teaching myself to play bridge over troubled water on piano. I know, on the nose, but I was proud. Then Rachel spiked a 99.1 fever that night. Barely even a fever. But guess who had no one in the audience? A few weeks later, the whole family, yes, both sets of grandparents, showed up for Rachel's 15-minute flute recital. She basically butchered hot cross buns, but you'd think she was playing Carnegie Hall. Rachel figured out how to work the system early. By age 7, most of her health issues were behind her, but that didn't stop her from using them to her advantage. Headache? Day off school. Feeling tired? Someone else, usually me, had to do her chores. Nervous about a test? Mom would literally call the school and get her deadline pushed back. Meanwhile, I spent more and more time in my bedroom, lost in books about art history and antiques. Funny how that worked out. My room became my safe place. Mostly because Rachel claimed she was allergic to my lavender air freshener, so it was the one place she wouldn't come near. Want to hear something wild? Whenever she faked being sick, a part of me was actually relieved, because it meant I'd be sent to Grandma Marie's. At least someone that would ask me how my day was, or take an interest in what I liked. Grandma's the one who got me into vintage jewelry. She had this amazing collection of costume pieces that she let me sort and label. Looking back, it feels almost symbolic. But the worst part wasn't even the obvious favoritism. It was the way my family twisted the past to justify it. Rachel just needs more attention because of her difficult start. Or Sarah's always been an independent one. She understands that Rachel has special needs. No, I didn't understand. I was a kid. I didn't get why being healthy meant I deserved less affection. Now that I'm older, I can see how those years shaped me. When you grow up hearing that you're a threat or a burden just by existing, that doesn't go away easily. Still, I'll give them this. It taught me how to rely on myself. When no one's checking your homework or celebrating your wins, you learn to be your own support system. High school? People usually either loved it or hated it. Me? I saw it as an escape plan. While Rachel was building her middle school drama queen legacy, I was quietly laying the foundation to get out. And let me tell you, nothing lights a fire under you like knowing no one's coming to help. Remember how I used to organize Grandma Marie's jewelry by type, color, and decade? That taught me the value of structure and detail. I brought that same mindset to high school. My desk looked like something out of productivity blog. Color-coded notes, detailed schedules, everything in its place. Rachel used to mock me for it. Call me Rain Man. Real classy, right? But here's the thing about being invisible. No one's watching your every move. So you're free to quietly do whatever the heck you want. I joined every club I could, as long as it didn't interfere with my shifts at Carson's Diner. Shout out to Carol, the owner. She remembered my birthday, even when my own parents didn't. Debate team? Check. President of the National Honor Society? Check. Editor-in-chief of the school paper? Check. It was in debate that I really found my voice. There's something incredibly satisfying about tearing apart someone's argument while keeping your cool. Debate also taught me how to negotiate, a skill I didn't realize I'd need later in life. I won state twice, but my parents didn't attend either competition. Why? Because Rachel had soccer games. She was on the C team. She didn't even play. Junior year is when things really got interesting. I took the SAT and got a flawless score. Not pretty good. I mean perfect. A full 1600. You know how rare that is? Less than 1% of test takers ever hit that mark. I stared at the results screen for almost 20 minutes, convinced it had to be a glitch. Then I rushed home to tell my parents. Big mistake. Mom was in the kitchen, helping Rachel with her English homework. The conversation went something like this. Me, Mom, I got a perfect SAT score. Mom, that's nice, honey, but keep your voice down. Rachel's trying to focus. She has a big test tomorrow. Rachel, yeah, some of us actually have to study, Miss Genius. Mom, Rachel, sweetie, don't get upset. You're just a different kind of learner. I still have that SAT printout somewhere. Never made it onto the fridge. Meanwhile, Rachel's C+ in English, front and center. Fridge real estate secured. And yes, complete with a "we're so proud of you" magnet. Now, let's talk college applications. That whole process, I handled it entirely on my own. 15 schools. Wrote every essay myself. Tracked down my own recommendation letters. Did the entire financial aid process solo. Mr. Chun, my guidance counselor, was the real MVP. My parents were too busy, so I stayed after school to complete the FAFSA. Then the acceptance letters started rolling in. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Michigan, every one of them came with a scholarship. I kept them all in a locked box under my bed, because I knew what would happen if Rachel found out. Suddenly, everything would become about her again. If Sarah goes to Harvard, I'll be all alone. Cue the waterworks. The day I got the full ride offer from Yale, Rachel made JV cheer. Guess which one was celebrated? Hint! I ate microwave mac and cheese in my room. They went to Olive Garden. But honestly, that scholarship was my escape route. Full tuition, housing, meal plan, book allowance, the works. I could finally get out of that house where I was either invisible or a burden. When the official Yale package arrived, I went to my favorite corner of the local library, a fourth-floor window seat that overlooked the park, and cried for an hour, not out of sadness. It was pure, overwhelming relief. That night at dinner, I told my parents I'd accepted the offer and was going to Yale. Dad, Michigan? That's so far away. Mom, what if Rachel needs you? Then came the real kicker. I hope you're not expecting any help from us. Cheer comps aren't cheap. Rachel crying, finally, can I have your room? I need space for my TikToks. That summer, I picked up double shifts at Carson's Diner to save what I could. Carol, bless her heart, always slipped me extra tips and made sure I took home leftover pie after closing. But more than that, she taught me a critical life lesson: how to spot real people in a world full of phonies. Baby, she'd say, me, whether in diners or in life, the people who make the most noise are usually the ones with the least to offer. Move-in day at the University of Michigan came, and, surprise, my parents couldn't make it. Rachel had a cheer competition, so Aunt Kelly stepped up. She helped me settle into my dorm, fluff my pillows, and slipped me an envelope with $500 inside. Your Grandma Marie wanted you to have this, she said. She's so proud of you. Later, I found out Grandma had been stashing away bits of her Social Security checks just to give me that gift. That night, lying in my new dorm bed, I made a quiet promise to myself. I'd build a life so rich, so full, so meaningful that being forgotten would never happen again. Not to prove a point, not out of spite, but for the 8-year-old girl who got packed off to Grandma's house every time she sneezed. College marked the start of something new, something finally mine. It flew by in a blur of all-nighters, cheap ramen, and glorious freedom. I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Michigan. Not that my parents noticed. They were too busy helping Rachel transfer to her third college in 2 years. And that's where things took a turn. I landed an entry-level position at Everett and Phillips Auction House in Detroit, though that's not its real name. If you know the world of antiques, you probably know exactly who I mean. It was a high-end place, wealthy clients, legacy estates, that kind of environment. I started in estate sales, cataloging the possessions of the recently deceased. Not the most glamorous role, but it covered the bills. Then came my first real break. The first few months were routine: silverware sets, vintage furniture, endless teacups, until we were assigned to Kingston Estate. Mrs. Kingston was a wealthy widow with no heirs. She left behind a mountain of so-called costume jewelry, boxes of it, rooms full, even. This was where all those afternoons organizing Grandma Marie's jewelry paid off. While sorting, I found something odd, a brooch from the Art Deco era. It wasn't flashy, but something felt different. The weight was too heavy for a fake. The clasp was too refined for mass market. I spent my entire lunch break digging into old jewelry trademarks and hallmarks. I even stayed late to use the company's premium access to antique databases. The deeper I went, the more certain I became. This wasn't costume jewelry. This was a real deal, valuable, possibly even rare. The issue? I was the new hire. No one was going to take my word for it. So I did exactly what the debate team had trained me to do. I built my case. For 2 weeks, every lunch break and evening went into research. I studied Art Deco design, learned authentication processes, and even blew some of my sad little savings on a gemology mini-course online. Then I finally got the nerve to take my findings to my manager, Mr. Harrison. I came in with a full presentation, comparison photos, provenance records, the works. Sir, I began, I believe we may have something valuable in the Kingston collection. He barely looked up for his phone. Sarah, we already logged those as costume pieces. You're right, I said, but check out these makers' marks. They line up exactly with Carter's 1925 signatures. That got Harrison's attention. He looked up and asked, "Where'd you learn all this?" I shrugged. Just did some digging. Long story short, that costume brooch sold for $47,000 at auction. Turns out it was from a rare 1920s European collection, almost completely undocumented. But here's what really changed. Harrison started trusting me. For the first time, he began assigning me more delicate, high-value items to evaluate. Suddenly, all those hours I spent organizing Grandma Marie's jewelry didn't feel pointless anymore. They had laid the groundwork for something real. I dove in head first. I took every online course I could scrape the money together for, spent weekends hitting estate sales, researching old pieces, kept a notebook filled with notes about different verification techniques. My tiny apartment looked like a jewelry historian's command center, walls covered in hallmark charts, jeweler signatures, and appraisal guides. And it paid off. The auction house began pulling in serious money on items I'd authenticated. I built relationships with private collectors and antique dealers. My knowledge of the market grew. So did my commission checks. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was actually saving. But my family still couldn't have cared less. I kept going to Sunday dinners. Don't ask me why. Conversations went something like this. Mom, Sarah's still at that antique shop, right? Me, it's an auction house. And yes, I just verified a rare Tiffany necklace. Rachel cutting in, OMG, speaking of jewelry, you guys have to see the bracelet I just got from Claire's. But honestly, I didn't care anymore, because for once, I had something that was mine. Something I wasn't doing to chase approval. I was actually good at this. And it had nothing to do with being Rachel's sister, or being the family's afterthought. Then came the Rothschild collection. It was about 2 years into my job. An estate from an extremely wealthy family with a serious reputation in the collector world. People were buzzing about it. I was on the team responsible for cataloging their jewelry, and that's when I noticed something. A pretty standard-looking Art Nouveau piece. Everyone else had glossed over it, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I spent 3 days researching it. Barely slept. What I found, the piece was traced back to a legendary French jeweler. The collection had been thought lost during World War II. That ordinary item sold for $238,000 at auction. Harrison called me into his office. I thought he was going to offer me a promotion. Instead, he said, Sarah, you're wasting your time here. You should be running your own authentication firm. At first, I laughed. Me? Start a business? With what money? But the idea stuck. I started doing freelance evaluations on the side. Nothing major. Just word-of-mouth work. Then private collectors began reaching out directly. Turns out I had a bit of a reputation. One evening, I was sitting in my cramped apartment, surrounded by all my research binders and loop lenses and gem testing kits when it hit me. I could actually do this. I could build something of my own. So, naturally, I did the only logical thing. I maxed out my car loan, drained my savings, and rented a tiny office in the sketchy part of town. People thought maybe I was crazy. I turned a tiny storage room above a Chinese takeout place into my first office. It was about the size of a college dorm. The rent was cheap because it always smelled like Kung Pao chicken. And the Wi-Fi only worked if you sat in the corner by the window. But it was mine, and that was everything. Those first few months? Brutal. I'd wake up at 4 a.m., heart racing, doing math in my head. How long could I stretch what little money I had left? My loan felt like a noose, and my office furniture included a folding card table from Goodwill and a chair I found on the sidewalk. Don't worry, I cleaned it thoroughly. But here's the thing. When it comes to luxury jewelry, reputation, and connections are everything. And thanks to my time at the auction house, I had both. I started small, authentication gigs for local antique shops. My fees were lower than the big-name services, but my reports were meticulous. People noticed. Then came the turning point. About 6 months in, a dealer I'd known from my auction days reached out. A client of his had inherited a large collection of Victorian brooches and wanted them authenticated before selling. The job turned out to be a deep archive, 3 generations of heirlooms. I spent 2 weeks straight researching every piece, barely sleeping. And in the process, I uncovered 2 incredibly rare originals that others had wrongly labeled as reproductions. The client was thrilled. She paid my full rate and then added a 10% commission when the pieces sold. That check, $86,000, more than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined. That changed everything. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Word had gotten around. Private collectors, estate attorneys. Even my old auction house began sending work my way. I have a strong hunch Harrison quietly helped spread the word. Thanks, boss. By my second year, I hired my first employee, Jenny, a newly minted gemology grad who reminded me a little too much of myself. Super smart. Overlooked because she was quiet. Today, She's my head of authentication, and worth every penny. The business exploded faster than I expected. We moved into a real office downtown. Finally free of that constant kung pao aroma, I built a small team of experts. We developed a reputation for spotting hidden gems. Literally, you'd be shocked how many million-dollar pieces are collecting dust in people's attics, mistaken for junk. The one challenge? Keeping all of this from my family. Even as the business boomed, they still thought I worked at a little antique store. Rachel, during family dinners, would throw out lines like, "Sarah, I found some old costume jewelry I was going to donate. Think your little shop wants it." This, mind you, on the same day I authenticated a $1.2 million Faberge piece. Me, sure, I'll take a look. Mom, introduce me to her friends. This is Sarah, my other daughter. She does something with old jewelry. Meanwhile, I had just been quoted in Forbes under my business name, and we'd open our third office. Funny how easy it is to hide in plain sight, isn't it? Honestly, the secret almost became fun, a private little joke I kept to myself. I'd sit at Sunday dinner in a clearance rack dress from Target, really Chanel, listening to Rachel ramble about her new entry-level marketing role, knowing full well I had just closed a deal worth more than her entire annual salary. I even made a game. I'd wear authentic Harry Winston earrings or a vintage brooch to family dinners and silently wait to see if anyone noticed. No one ever did. Rachel once spent 20 straight minutes bragging about her $200 Michael Kors watch. Meanwhile, I had on a vintage Patek Philippe worth more than her entire car. But the real challenge? Managing the growth. By year 5, we had physical offices in Detroit, Chicago, and New York. I spent more nights in hotel rooms than in my own bed. We became known in elite circles for being discreet, which, it turns out, is exactly what many wealthy clients want when getting their jewelry authenticated. They want privacy. They want quiet. And the money? Let's just say we had to hire a dedicated team of financial advisors to handle it all. Despite that, I kept things low-key. I bought a beautiful, comfortable house in a great neighborhood, but nothing flashy. I drove a luxury car that didn't scream luxury. The only area where I let myself go a little wild? My home office. It had top-of-the-line authentication tech, a cutting-edge security system, and a custom-built vault that would make Fort Knox jealous. The funny part? My family thought I was helping them out by living simply. Mom would say things like, "It's so generous of Sarah to pitch in. She must be living off ramen noodles." Meanwhile, I had just authenticated a historical collection that paid out more than their entire mortgage. Here's something odd about success. The more you achieve, the harder it becomes to explain to people who've always seen you as less than. It's like trying to describe color to someone who's only ever seen grayscale. They just don't have the frame of reference. At this point, my business was thriving. We had a lock on the Midwest high-end authentication market, and our name was golden. Pun absolutely intended. Yet, every Sunday, like clockwork, I'd show up at my parents' house for dinner, slipping back into my modest antique shop girl persona. The disconnect was laughable. I'd spend mornings on video calls with clients in Dubai, afternoons analyzing pieces worth millions, and evenings at home pretending not to care when Rachel dominated the dinner table with her latest career win, usually something like getting her boss's coffee order right. But there was one Sunday I'll never forget. Earlier that day, I completed an authentication for a long-lost Cartier piece that had been locked in a safety deposit box for 40 years. The commission alone? Let's just say we were solidly in seven-figure territory. I went straight from that meeting to dinner at my parents'. I was still glowing, high from the success. And as I sat down, Mom looked at me and said, "Sarah, sweetie, are you doing okay? Your clothes are looking kind of worn." "Oh, just saving money," I replied, knowing full well I was wearing a $3,000 cashmere sweater chosen specifically for its unassuming look. Rachel piped up, "Well, maybe if you had a real job instead of playing with old jewelry." Dad chimed in, "Rachel, be nice. Not everyone can be as successful as you." I nearly choked on my pot roast trying not to laugh out loud. That was right around the time I started sending anonymous monthly transfers to my parents. Aunt Kelly had quietly told me they were having a hard time covering Rachel's student loans and medical bills. Mom casually mentioned that they might have to sell the house. Despite everything, it was still my childhood home. I couldn't let it go. So I set up a $5,000 monthly deposit into their bank account under a name they didn't recognize. When they asked about it, I said I'd gotten a small grant and was living off rice and beans to make ends meet. They assumed the rest came from Aunt Kelly or some other relative. Naturally, Rachel took credit, claiming she'd inspired the family to pull together. Watching Rachel spend my money was its own kind of entertainment. It helped them, sure, but it also changed things in unexpected ways. My parents started treating me like I was some sort of tragic hero, a noble, struggling martyr making painful sacrifices for the family. Meanwhile, Rachel's purchases became flashier and more ridiculous. She showed up to dinner with new designer handbags, insisting they were outlet finds. Please, I can spot real Gucci in my sleep. She started jetting off on vacations and filling her Instagram with humble brag captions about living her best life. I'm almost certain she was using the money I was sending for tuition and bills on shopping and luxury getaways. But I stayed silent. The irony was too rich to ruin. Then came the MBA twist. Rachel suddenly decided she wanted to go back to school for her MBA, naturally, and only a private university would do, because, of course, nothing but the best for her. Mom called me crying again, this time saying there was no way they could afford the tuition. I gently suggested that Rachel consider a solid program at a public university. My mother replied, "Oh, honey, you just don't understand. Your sister has to maintain a certain image." Then, as if on cue, she asked if I could increase my monthly help just for a few years. I bumped it up to $7,000 a month. My business barely felt it, but watching them praise Rachel for taking her future seriously, while assuming I was living off ramen to make it possible, yeah, that hurt a little. The punchline? I was actually invited as a guest lecturer at the very business school Rachel wanted to attend. The dean had personally asked me to speak about authentication in luxury markets and scaling a niche startup. My family, of course, had no idea. I had to invent some fake reason for missing Sunday dinner that week. By then, my life had split into two distinct versions. Monday through Saturday, I was running a thriving multi-million-dollar authentication firm. But Sunday night, I was still Sarah, the other daughter, who supposedly worked at some dusty antique shop. It felt like I had a secret identity, like I was leading a double life, and the weight of that lie was getting harder to carry. It all started to unravel at Thanksgiving. Rachel had made a few too many backhanded comments about my little jewelry gig, and Mom kept apologizing to relatives about my bohemian lifestyle. Dad even suggested, again, that I consider getting a real job. Honestly, I think I always knew the truth would eventually explode. I just didn't realize how hard it would hit. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mom called me in tears. She'd been diagnosed with a herniated disc, and the idea of hosting dinner for 20 people was too much to handle. Now, I'd love to tell you I offered to help out of pure kindness, but in reality, I was just tired of pretending her dry turkey tasted good. So I said, "Why don't I handle the food this year? I can get it catered." She replied, "Oh, honey, we can't afford a caterer." I smiled and said, "Don't worry about the cost. I've been saving." That's when Mom gave me the look. "You're not taking out a loan, are you?" "Nope. I hired a luxury catering firm I regularly use for client events. They're phenomenal. The kind of food that makes you wonder why you've ever bothered cooking at all. It cost more than my parents believed I made in 2 months, but it didn't matter. Thanksgiving morning arrived, and I was feeling pretty good. I had my laptop with me because I needed to keep an eye on a major online auction happening in Hong Kong. A stunning Art Nouveau necklace was going up for sale, and one of my clients needed it authenticated if they won. Lunch showed up right on time, hot, perfectly plated, and absolutely gorgeous. Naturally, Rachel had something to say. "Store-bought stuffing? Really, Sarah? Mom's is way better," she scoffed. This from the same woman who once set off the smoke alarm, making toast. Mom kept apologizing to the guests for not cooking herself, but you could see they were loving the meal. Rachel shut up the moment she tried the maple glazed Brussels sprouts, which, by the way, cost more per serving than her weekly groceries. Just before dessert, I stepped away to check the auction. It was heating up, and I needed to be ready if my client placed a winning bid. I set up in my old bedroom, still frozen in time from my high school days. Meanwhile, Rachel's childhood room had gone through 3 remodels. Then came the turning point. I'd left my authentication software running, with tabs open that showed account dashboards, ongoing contracts, and recent deals. Rachel barged in, didn't even knock, claiming she needed a phone charger. Old habits. But then she saw my screen. And just like that, she realized this was her golden opportunity to humiliate me in front of the whole family. She grabbed my laptop and, smirking, said, "Let's show everyone what Sarah's really doing with her time." Before I could stop her, she marched back into the dining room, laptop in hand. Picture it. 20 people, relatives, cousins, family, friends, lounging in a food coma, sipping expensive wine they assumed was Trader Joe's. Rachel, triumphant. "Let's take a look at what super important work Sarah's doing on Thanksgiving." She turned the screen around dramatically, expecting to reveal something petty, maybe an eBay sale or some Etsy listing. Instead, the room froze. The only sound was the ticking of the fancy clock I'd gifted Mom last year. She still thought it was a reproduction. On the screen, current account balance, $12.4 million pending authentication contract. For $185,000 last completed transaction, $1.2 million quarterly revenue report. $4.2 million Rachel's face twisted through at least 5 emotions in 3 seconds. She staggered back slightly, clearly dizzy. "This can't be right," she whispered. Mom asked, "Rachel, what is it?" Her voice cracked. She's rich? Sarah is rich." Cue absolute chaos. The silence somehow got deeper. Then Mom started laughing. Like really laughing. She said, "Don't be ridiculous. Sarah works at that cute little antique shop." I stood up slowly, smoothing my simple cashmere sweater, the one that cost more than their monthly mortgage. I said, "Actually, Mom, I own one of the biggest jewelry authentication firms in the country. You know that antique shop you always mention? I've been authenticating $1 million pieces for years. That business you never asked about? We have offices in 3 cities." Dad choked on his drink. Aunt Kelly dropped her fork. One of my uncles had a coughing fit. Mom's laughter changed. Her face went from red to deep purple. Then she stood up so fast her chair hit the floor. She shouted, "You're sitting on millions and you let us struggle?" I responded, "Struggle? I send you $7,000 every single month." She snapped back, "While you're sitting on millions? Your sister has student debt." And there it was. Not congratulations. Not "we're so proud of you." Just pure outrage that I hadn't handed over more. Rachel, shocker, started crying, going on about how I betrayed the family, how she had a right to know. Then Dad joined in. "How could you be so selfish? We're your parents. We raised you." That's when I snapped. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, treated like the underachiever. All of it boiled over. I said, "Raise me? You sent me to Grandma's every time I got a cold. You missed every award, every milestone, because you didn't want Rachel to feel left out. You didn't save a dime for my college, but you took out loans for hers. And now you're mad that I built something for myself." The next 5 minutes were bedlam. Mom was yelling about family duty. Dad was shouting about ungrateful children. Rachel bounced between tears and demanding to know exactly how much I had. Meanwhile, the poor catering staff awkwardly tried to serve dessert. I picked up my laptop, grabbed my Hermes bag, the one Mom once complimented, thinking it was a knockoff, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Mom already planning how to use my money, something about Rachel's MBA and a new car. I drove home in my average car, a limited edition BMW, and within minutes, my phone blew up. The family group chat exploded. Rachel took to Facebook, of course, blasting out dramatic posts about hidden family fortune and greedy siblings. And that was just the beginning. The days after Thanksgiving felt like watching a tornado destroy your house while you're standing on the front lawn, completely awake, and totally unable to stop it. Let's start with the text messages. Within an hour walking out, I had 47 missed calls and over 200 messages. Mom's text with her own emotional roller coaster. 7:42 p.m. How dare you walk out on your family? 8:15 p.m. We need to talk about this like adults. 9:03 p.m. Your sister deserves a piece of your success. 10:30 p.m. I've already spoken to a realtor about upgrading to a nicer neighborhood. 11:45 p.m. Why aren't you answering? This is your mother. Meanwhile, Rachel was going full influencer mode, posting long-winded Facebook rants about how her secretly rich sister had been hoarding wealth. While I watched my so-called loving family unravel, the internet turned into a circus. The comment section on Rachel's Facebook post was wild. Distant cousins, people I hadn't spoken to since high school, all suddenly had opinions about my selfishness. Total strangers felt entitled to weigh in on my character. But this part got me. Rachel actually wrote, "All those years I tried to help Sarah grow her career, giving her advice about moving on from that little antique shop, and she was secretly rich the whole time. The betrayal is devastating." Devastating? Her only career advice was once suggesting I try selling handmade earrings on Etsy. If you've never heard the term, flying monkeys are what you get when toxic relatives send others to do their dirty work, like guilt trips on demand. That week, I heard from Aunt Susan, who I maybe see once every 3 years, calling to tell me, family is everything. Uncle Bob, who still thinks I'm in middle school, emailed a long rant about how I had a duty to share my blessings. Even my third cousin's wife's sister, how she got my number is still a mystery. Felt the need to call and talk about family loyalty. But it didn't stop there. The real show started Monday morning when I walked into the office. Guess who was waiting in the reception area? Yep, Mom, Dad, and Rachel. They told Jenny, my front desk assistant, that they had a scheduled appointment for jewelry authentication. Rachel was holding her Michael Kors bag like it was the crown jewels. It went downhill fast. Mom started, "We've had a family meeting." I replied, "Without the person you're actually talking about?" Mom ignored that. "And we decided it's only fair you set up trust funds for everyone." Rachel chimed in, "I need at least $2 million to start fresh." Dad added, "And your mother and I are thinking about retirement. Maybe a beach house in Florida." Me, "Did you forget the $7,000 I send you every month?" Rachel, "That's pennies compared to what you have. You owe us." Me, "I owe you? For what? The birthdays you skipped? The graduations you missed? The years I was a family disappointment?" Mom, "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. We gave you everything." My response, "No, I gave myself everything. And I'm done." Right there in the lobby of my own company, I pulled out my phone and canceled their monthly payments. Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. Rachel turned on the waterworks, but stopped when she realized no one was moved. Then they refused to leave. I had to call building security. Watching my 60-year-old mother be escorted out while yelling "ungrateful child" was surreal. Jenny quietly asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no, but I did have their names added to the building's do not admit list. For the next few weeks, the harassment didn't stop. New numbers, fake email accounts, even trying to contact my business through customer service. I finally had my legal team send a formal cease and desist, threatening harassment charges. That's when Mom played her final card. She called Grandma Marie. But here's the thing. Grandma Marie is smarter than all of them combined. Her reaction? Well, good for Sarah. Someone in this family finally made something of themselves. Mom didn't speak to her for 2 months after that. It's been 6 months since Thanksgiving.